In a time of rising unrest, when borders dominate headlines and immigration policy shapes the future of our nation, the truth matters. From the front lines of law enforcement, national security, and public policy, this is Frontline Facts, where rhetoric is stripped away, where politics takes a back seat, and where facts, hard, documented facts, lead the conversation. As instability grows beyond our southern border, as communities feel the impact at home, we bring you informed voices. Attorneys, senior law enforcement leaders, policy experts, and professionals who understand the law, the protocols, and the consequences. This isn't opinion. This isn't spin. This is clarity in a time of confusion. This is Frontline Facts, and the conversation starts now.
Welcome to Frontline Facts with Louisa Deason, where we correct the rhetoric on immigration issues and public policy. Today, we are diving into the importance of the safety of our Harris County communities, the chaos, the lack of cooperation amongst local, state, and federal government agencies can create, and how political agendas greatly affect crime rates and our safety. Today, we have the pleasure of having Jacqueline Lucci Smith. She's a former judge, but she's running for Harris County attorney. Now, she's not new to this arena. She has years and years of experience, not only as a judge, but as a attorney having her own firm. And she is incredibly professional and knows so much of the leadership that is lacking in today's environment. Welcome to the show this morning. I want to thank you very much for conceding to this interview. And I'd like to give you a moment to kind of go over and introduce some of the things that you've done, maybe some of the highlights of your career and how you got started.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me, Louisa. It's really a pleasure to be here today and to talk with your listeners and to bring some attention to the office of the Harris County Attorney, which so many people misunderstand or don't really understand what it does and the significance and the importance it plays in our everyday lives as members of the Harris County community. So you actually summed it up pretty well. I'm a 30 plus year attorney. I was actually licensed back in 1993. I started working at the Harris County Attorney's Office in 1998. I had worked for a couple of smaller firms in the early years of my career. And when I was in law school, I actually clerked for John O'Quinn. There's a blast from the past, a name that some of our older attorneys may remember.
That's right.
I worked in his office and as an intern during law school, and shortly thereafter, I even argued a case to the Texas Supreme Court about a year out of law school for him on a premises liability case, something that Harris County, that's the type of case that Harris County's, the attorney's office would be called upon to defend in some instances. So I started out in litigation and doing different types of work, eventually found my way into real estate law. I was hired by the county attorney's office back when Michael Fleming was the Harris County attorney. Michael Stafford was the first assistant attorney, and Paul Betancourt had just been elected tax assessor collector. So, Harris County was in really good hands back then, and I was appointed to be Paul Betancourt's tax liaison to the county attorney's office. As a first-time office holder, Paul, had a lot of questions about what exactly to do, what all the laws were regarding property tax and things like that. And I was involved in every aspect of property tax at his office and got to know him very, very well. It's funny because Paul, anyone who knows Uncle Paul knows that he's a very, very high energy individual and he demands people be responsive very quick. That's the nature of my personality as well. So we hit it off extremely well.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
One of the things that I know is, in today's day and age, a lot of what we see is the politics get involved. And it's really, your position is critical in Harris County, specifically as the attorney, because you're a legal advisor and you're not someone that is just throwing around what's the agenda of the day in politics. You really have to stick to what does the statute, what do the laws state? I've done a lot of that correcting of rhetoric on this podcast with immigration issues, but I know you bring to the table an incredible amount of experience and making sure that as you're positioning yourself, that you're really following what the law states and how the interpretation of that could change things drastically.
Right. It's so important to understand that the law is a living, breathing thing. And when I say that, I don't mean that our Constitution is a living, breathing thing and we can toss that around and change it on a whim, especially the federal Constitution. Everything has to come underneath one of those, the Constitution or its amendments. But with the legislature, even though they only meet every other year, they do change the law. So it's important to really understand that there are things that may not work in the law the way it was originally written, especially as quickly as we're developing. And as an attorney, you have to be able to identify those and make suggestions for those laws to be changed in a way that they make more sense. If you're out there touting and being the lightning rod on political issues, it's hard to have the credibility you need to go in and say, this law doesn't work because of this, or we can make this law better this way. If you're out there promoting a political agenda, because no one really knows if the laws that you're recommending are really based in law and constitution, or whether or not they're advancing a political agenda.
Well, and it's so important today. What is your belief in the proper role that a Harris County attorney should have? You're not only a legal advisor, but you're a policy advocate and kind of like, this is correcting the rhetoric, so to speak. You've got to set the standard so that people follow the law.
The attorney should always be the adult in the room. The attorney should always be the level-headed, balanced, reasoned approach. That's our job. That is our role. Yes, we're advocates, especially when we go into the courtroom and we're advocating for a client. But when somebody comes to you for legal advice, they don't want to listen to you rant and rave about some policy issue. They want to know. They want advice. They want counsel. They want somebody that can give them both sides of it. And it's important for an attorney to keep that common sense approach, the ability to communicate with everyone at every level, know your audience and be able to explain things in a way that makes sense to them. And the county attorney's office is unique. There's probably only a handful of departments in county government that actually interface with every single department. And I would think of things like IT, when you have a technology problem, we have an IT department, and that would go into the courtrooms. It would go into the clerk's office, commissioner's court's offices, that, it would touch every aspect of government, of county government, but it's very specific to that issue. The difference with the county attorney's office is we have that same role. We advise every single elected official. We advise all of the department heads. We advise the employees. We represent the employees. So knowing how to make sure that your positions remain consistent between departments so that Harris County can function as a unified government is really, really important. I can't go over to one department and tell them the law says one thing and another department to tell them it says another because they disagree on policy and I'm just a yes man. I have to bring that together. And that's the thing that's lacking in the county attorney's office today.
Well, and how do you think ensuring that the office stays within the civil legal mandates and doesn't start overstepping into policy making? What is your suggestion on that, or what is your view on that in your position?
Well, I believe that the county attorney's office should be advising commissioner's court and the other elected officials on policy. For example, let's talk about Uplift Harris. Uplift Harris was a program that the Harris County Commissioner's Court wanted to adopt. And many of you may remember they wanted to do a lottery. They were given a grant money and they wanted to do a lottery that would allow 1,900 families that won a lottery of people within the poverty level to receive an extra $500 a month for 18 months. And that's how they were going to spend the money. Well, our Constitution says that the government cannot benefit single individuals, that the public funds must be used for the community. Immediately, I would have said, y'all have real legal issues with just handing out $500 to a select few, as opposed to doing something with that money that could benefit the community as a whole. My opponent in the last election, his response was, "Oh, no, that's policy. I don't get involved with that. If they want to do it, I just tell them yes, and then I defend that in court when Ken Paxton sues us." Well, that's a whole lot of wasted time, energy, and effort. My approach would have been to advise Commissioners Court to use the money in a way that benefited the community as a whole. For example, a job training site within those communities, job training assistance, English as a second language, some classes that could help them get higher paying jobs, doing things that could help the community better their lives by bettering their circumstance as a whole, that would be open to anyone within that poverty range for free that could get assistance. That way, you're benefiting the community as a whole. You're elevating the entire class of individuals by making something accessible to them that will permanently change their life. I remember the Bible story, you give a man a fish he eats for a day, you teach him to fish he eats for a lifetime. That would be my approach. And that's how I would advise on policy. Now, if they still chose to go forward, that's them, that's their policy. But if you don't have the background and experience to give them alternatives to their policy ideas that still achieve their objectives, but within the law, then you can't serve your client. And that's the problem with having somebody in this office that doesn't have enough lifetime experience or legal experience to actually bring some common sense to the table.
Well, and we've seen some pretty crazy things going on. One of them is the O'Donnell decree and what that's done to the court systems and the bond issues and all that. But let's dive into, how do you define law and order within a civil legal office? There are things that we're seeing today that you just kind of go, what on earth is going on?
Right. I was very frustrated with some of the decisions of the prior administration regarding law enforcement, and I thought that he did not represent law enforcement well. So the first thing I think is important is that the county attorney's office should absolutely interface with the sheriff's office, all the constables' offices, and really assist them. In fact, one of the constables' offices had a very interesting idea for me when I asked them what they needed, what they thought would be helpful to them to know that we supported them. And they had suggested having an attorney review cases early on before a lawsuit was filed to see if they had exposure and liability, and possibly be able to resolve the case before the lawsuit was actually filed, and help the people that were the victims earlier. And I thought that was a really good idea to have that presence early on in a case, which led me to something that I recalled we used to do. If there was an officer involved shooting, for example, the county attorney who's going to be called upon to defend that officer should be out there on the scene, not just the press from the DA's office, but somebody out there actually looking at it, documenting evidence, seeing the interviews, finding out exactly what happened early on in the case so that we could better prepare for our defenses. That's the way you show law enforcement that you have their back. You actually show up and have their back. I was going to say, when you develop that type of rapport, now you have a situation where they feel free to go into the communities and assist in making them safer.
Well, and that kind of leads me into the next question, which is kind of, we were going to discuss this a little bit later, but look at the policies today. I mean, you obviously sat in a city council member meeting where you have a couple of these rogue woke liberals on city council that are wanting to just either eliminate or blur the lines between the cooperation amongst different levels of law enforcement, specifically ICE, and the dangers that poses to communities in Harris County when we're looking at a heightened assessment with higher crimes in the area. Although we're not getting the numbers exactly, we know that there's a rise in crime.
Well, we experience it every day. I mean, it doesn't take a lot to recall just horrific story of Jacqueline Lucci. And it's just so sad that something like this has to be politicized. Law enforcement should always be supported. Safe neighborhoods should always be supported. The problem with not supporting ICE in enforcing federal immigration laws is that if the officers don't help them in the beginning and let them take those folks off the streets in a very controlled way, that means ICE has to go into our neighborhoods to find them. And that means that with this heightened rhetoric, more things can happen. Just take a look at like Minnesota, where people actually, they attack the police cars or the ICE cars because they think that they're defending civil rights. If they're not defending civil rights, they're interfering with the law, they're breaking the law, and they're creating hazardous situations where people get hurt. And so It's really important to have clear direction for those law enforcement officers. What can they do and what can't they do? It's also important to be consistent in how you approach the law so that they have a clear understanding of what their obligations are and how far they can go and how far they can't go. And it's really important to have accountability by following up with them and making sure that they know that they have all the legal tools they need in order to do their job safely and efficiently.
Well, and with my background, having been the public affairs officer for both INS and ICE and decades of dealing with law enforcement locally and being able to put agents or actually take advantage of the 287G program, we're not asking other law enforcement agents to do our work in 100% capacity. The 287G program really is basically allow us into the jails, as you said, you nailed it, into a controlled environment so that ICE agents can go in, or they can have the access in the databases, or maybe deputize 2 or 3 officers within a division of a different law enforcement agency to just ask the right questions, not do all the immigration work that ICE agents do, but just ask the right questions to simply identify if that person has been arrested before, how many times, regardless of whether it's a civil matter or not. These are civil cases in most cases, but when you have a foreign national that's arrested, there has been an alleged crime committed, and there does happen to be communications between other law enforcement within other states and different divisions when there's a homicide. So the fact that there doesn't appear to want to be much cooperation with ICE, I think, in my opinion, is ludicrous. And I know that you've nailed that several times and discussed it openly, because you're right. It is a critical aspect of cooperation to keep communities safe.
Well, it's what's interesting about it. This all started because they felt like those two, my opponent was one of them, but those 3 city council people thought, well, we now have all these administrative warrants. We don't have to honor them. And then when I actually started looking into what those I think there were 700,000 roughly additional civil warrants that were fed into the system by ICE, I looked at it, and every single one of those warrants was based on a final deportation order. So what ICE had done was, we had this mass immigration that happened under Joe Biden, uncontrolled, undocumented, didn't know where people were, didn't know who came in. There were lots of gotaways. And then there were people that came in, said, oh, I have amnesty, I'm claiming amnesty. And then we just said, we took their name and put them out into the public and said, we'll come back and have a hearing. So what happened was ICE took all the deportation orders that had already been issued by an immigration judge that had ordered these people deported, and they fed those into the system with civil warrants saying this person has a deportation order. The difference between just picking somebody up and knowing that they're here illegally and picking up somebody that has a civil warrant, the difference is if they have a civil warrant, they have already been adjudicated to be deported, and their very presence is probable cause that they are committing a federal felony. Once you have probable cause that they are committing a felony, you absolutely have a duty to maintain them and report them and cooperate with ICE. So the immigration reform that they wanted to do was to say, well, gosh, they all it is a traffic stop. Maybe all they had was a taillight that was busted out. All you have to do is write him a ticket for that and let him go. You shouldn't be calling ICE over a broken taillight. Well, you're not calling ICE over a broken taillight. You're calling ICE because that person is committing a federal felony by their very presence in our community.
That's right. And a lot of people don't realize it is a crime to enter this country illegally. It's a Title 8, Section 1325 violation. The first time it's a misdemeanor, the second time it's a felony. So, this just become a real political agenda for a lot of these topics, and a vitriol. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the death threats against ICE agents has increased up to 8,000%, and the violence against them is about up to 1,600%. I never saw that in the existence of my being the public affairs officer back when, and I'd never seen it. And I married to a former ICE agent who's just been hired back to go back and, use his knowledge and experience to help with deportations today. It's really just disheartening what's happened. It's just such a political bonfire. But let's go into some other topics. I know that you obviously are Name one decision, for example, with the current county attorney made that would have handled things differently, in your opinion, in some of the most egregious cases you've seen.
Well, I think one of the things that just strikes me is that he and my current opponent, Abby Kanan, both want to promote that they are for voting rights. They're going to protect voting rights. They're going to sue everybody over voting rights. But the problem with that is they're not actually enforcing voting law. For example, in 2022, I believe it was, or 2021, the election no, it's 2022. The election in 2022, we had a couple of different problems that happened. The first one was some of the polling locations opened late. And then the second one was a whole lot of polling locations ran out of paper. So a group of a Democratic-based group sued to get an injunction. They sued Harris County to get an injunction in district court to require voting locations to stay open an extra hour. And I remember the former county attorney going on and saying, well, who's going to vote between 7 and 8 is going to be all your little, the workers and the blue collar guys, meaning the Democrats. And I didn't see a problem with leaving the voting polls open for an extra hour. So I just didn't defend that. Well, of course, what happens is they get the injunction because there's nobody there defending and presenting the other side. And then it gets appealed directly to the Supreme Court, Texas Supreme Court, within a half an hour. And the Texas Supreme Court goes, no, you can't change our laws that say how long you leave a polling location open. Election day is election day. It's from 7 to 7. We're real sorry that they were late. Happens all the time, but that doesn't mean we change our laws every time. And so they shut it down. Now you have a situation where people had gone to the polls, had voted late, and their votes were going to be thrown out. And so then they were claiming they were disenfranchised. That level of ambiguity because of the absolute irresponsible position taken by the Harris County Attorney's Office and number one, not defending election day hours and the election itself and the election process resulted in confusion and mayhem. On top of that, you had very close elections. Harris County is really a purple county. It's not, while the Dems usually pull it out a little bit more than the R's, the Republicans, it's so close. I mean, so many races are decided by 1% of the vote. I mean, they're very close races. So when you have something that close and you then have something that creates ambiguity in the results, now you have a basis for a claim. It's hard to prove under the election code, but you do have a basis. So you run out of paper so people can't vote, and then you want to keep other precincts open that are in other areas. Now you've got a completely questionable outcome in the election, which makes people very uneasy. Those are things that I would have handled very, very differently. First of all, I would have absolutely defended the election code and the hours of operation for voting, period. 7 to 7. If you're not in line by 7 o'clock, you don't vote. And then there's no discrepancy. There's no ambiguity. And people can have faith in that particular election.
Well, and what I'd like to do is we're going to go ahead and take a Frontline Facts sponsor break. We'll be right back. But when we come back, I certainly want to discuss the potential of what those types of scenarios create for voter fraud and the integrity of, people ask me all the time, what is the most important vote? Well, your local voting is the most critical because it really can affect state and federal voting platforms as well. So we're going to take a quick commercial break and come right back to that topic.
Okay. Thank you.
Listen, we're going to have to cut over to a commercial break real quick because we do have sponsors we want to highlight. Thank you for waiting.
When the stakes are high, clarity matters. In today's fast-moving media environment, misinformation spreads fast, especially around immigration policy, national security, and public safety. That's where Deason Consulting Services steps in. Led by Louisa Deason, former investigative journalist, DHS and ICE subject matter expert, and certified neuro-linguistic programming practitioner, Deason Consulting equips leaders, candidates, law enforcement, and executives with clear posture, confident delivery, and fact-based messaging. From immigration policy education and media response strategy to crisis communication and executive message development, Decent Consulting helps you cut through the rhetoric and speak with authority. Whether you're preparing for a press conference, navigating a complex policy issue, or facing high-pressure media scrutiny, we prepare you to lead. Decent Consulting Services: strategic communication, informed leadership, measured response. Contact Decent Consulting today and be ready when it matters most. Call today 832-244-2488 or email louisa@decentconsultingservices.com.
Do you have bad credit? Have you tried fixing it yourself and just get frustrated and feel like you will never be able to get to your goals? If credit scores determine what you buy and at what cost, then does it not make more sense to actually hire the big dogs to save you money long term? At Decent's Credit Restoration Services, they have a group of certified and licensed credit attorneys, also versed in consumer protection laws, who do all the work on your behalf to permanently eliminate those negative and derogatory items affecting your credit scores. As we say, there are two things we cannot help you cheat your way out of, and that is death and paying taxes. But restoring your credit will change your life. Please contact Decent's Credit Restoration Services by calling 832-244-2488. Don't wait. Rates are not going down, but your credit scores will go up.
Well, we are back. I am Louisa Beeson. I am your host for Frontline Facts. We are correcting the rhetoric, and we're coming back to our guest today. We now return to Frontline Facts. I am your host, Louisa Beeson. We have the pleasure of having as a guest our Harris County candidate running for attorney, and Jacqueline Smith. We had left the break kind of going over some of these different offices. Now let's talk about what happens when you have different divisions talking about different stances and making things very political as opposed to following kind of the rule of law.
Well,
and what you see today.
So I think that one of the issues that we have today is that every single office has become political, meaning that they're all about the rhetoric and not the results. And there are some offices that you really need to have as a stopgap or a line of defense to keep people together, to build those bridges, and to be able to reconcile some of the conflicting policies where possible, and also to give very clear direction on what the law is. And I think the county attorney's office is a prime example of that type of office. It is so important to have somebody that is seasoned in that office, because the buck stops with the county attorney that's elected, not the first assistant, not the attorneys that are representing them in court, but the person that actually holds the office. And that person has to make judgment calls. And having good judgment and a broad experience and years of experience is really important to be able to give that type of advice. And when you have different, we have 8 constables in Harris County. I think 2 are Republican and 6 are Democrats. That doesn't mean that law enforcement has different priorities. They should all have the same priorities. They all have the same mandates. They all have the same obligation to our community. So while there may be slight differences in policies and procedures within those constable precincts, every single one of them deserves your absolute best advice and your best direction and your best advocacy. And you can't just say, well, I don't like that policy, so I'm not going to support him. As a county attorney, you absolutely have that obligation to go in, no matter whether they're Republican or Democrat, and give them the benefit of your experience and your knowledge and your expertise.
Well, and I think you just highlighted exactly what my next question is. Do you have a current example of how somebody who uses the political rhetoric and the agenda instead of driven by the law, that the messaging changes and it really does create confusion? and it can wreak havoc. We're seeing what's happening right now at city council with rogue DAs and rogue judges that don't really, it's kind of like they're blurring the lines between what is right, what's wrong.
So when I was a judge, one of the things that I had to do was treat everybody equally and fairly and be consistent in my rulings. And in order to do that, I had to know the law, understand the law, research the law, and make those calls, calling balls and strikes. If you are somebody that can only see the plaintiff side of things or the defendant side of things, or only the R side of things or the D side of things, you're not going to be able to do that in a way that promotes confidence, common sense, and seasoned outcomes. Instead, what you're going to have is rhetoric over results. And that's what we have happening in city council. We have a group of folks that are running for different offices and elections that want to get out there and yell and scream the loudest so that they can get on TV and they can get on the radio shows and they can go out there and say, look at me, I'm advocating for you. And that's not their job or the job that they're running for, to be out there and be the lightning rod. Instead, what they should be doing is saying, my job as an elected official is to promote the safety of our communities, to promote sound policies, really effective and efficient government, really be physically conservative, promote accountability, transparency. And you can only do that if you take the law, apply the law equally across all aspects and all offices, and really understand it and give that advice to the people that need to have it, including whether, if you're sitting as a council member, if you don't know the law and you want to enact a policy, I guess you kind of need to rely on somebody to interpret the law. And what's really bothersome in my race is Abby Kamen was one of those people. And she didn't care that city council was about to lose $110 million in public safety grants. Her position was, I'm going to double down. I'm going to fight for the illegal immigrants in this community. And I'm going to say, don't even cooperate with them at all. And I don't think they should. I don't think our police officers should cooperate with ICE. I think we should just she wanted to promote a policy where they didn't even call ICE and let ICE know or check for those warrants that were in the system. And that's what she was promoting. And this is supposed to be somebody that's going to be our county attorney and advising our law enforcement on what to do and how to cooperate. That's a real problem because it's all about headlines and not results.
Exactly. It's follow the law. Coordination is not optional. It's required. Now, I know that there aren't memorandums of understanding written out, but in long standings, we've generally had a good cooperation between ICE and between INS with HPD and with Harris County. And I know that recently Governor Abbott had signed into law that statute that requires that there is cooperation in the 287G. But you know what? The storyline never changes. It's always, we don't want to cooperate because as a law enforcement agency, people won't report crimes. Well, what they don't understand is that by not reporting crimes, you're not resolving the crime issue in that specific community. There are protections at the federal level for certain kinds of crime victims that can be protected. But, legal judgment here it's common sense for the safety of the public. And a lot of times, as you've mentioned, these are final orders of removal. And I don't know that the federal government has taken orders from a woke civil activist or a paid agitator or certainly someone from city council before. That would be very surprising. The laws that are on the books have been on the books for about 35 years. It's crazy.
Well, and in the Senate Bill 4 that they were referring to, the anti-sanctuary city law that was signed by Governor Abbott is actually, I believe, from the 2017 legislative session. So it's not that new. And it's something that typically our communities have adhered to. And Texas is not, even the liberal cities had not really become sanctuary cities.
So we obviously know that we have to follow the law. Coordination is not optional. It is a requirement. But, you look at some of the legislation that we see at the federal level. And of course, these statutes, many of them have been on the books for about 35 years. They haven't changed. And memorandums of agreement, whether they've been signed or not, just makes common sense. But you look at city council, and I don't remember a time even when I was back as the public affairs officer for Tom Holman or others that stated that, we get to select what laws we want to follow and which ones we don't. And these legislation pieces have been integral to the safety of communities at large, not just the fact that we don't blur the lines, but these are state and federal statutes in place that have agreements to keep the public safe.
Right. And the problem is that those laws have been a source of discourse, not necessarily to the level that we're seeing where it's actually the violent rhetoric, divisive, doxing ICE agents, that kind of thing. But it has been a very hot topic for public discourse as far as immigration reform goes. Those laws have been on the books, and various Congresses have tried different ways to approach reforming immigration law. And today we have the immigration laws on the books that we have because there has not been a consensus on how to do it. That has led to some ambiguity as far as policy messaging. And the reason I say that is the people that are so offended by Trump's mass deportation that he's trying to accomplish fail to recognize it's on the heels of mass illegal immigration under the Biden administration.
An invasion.
It's not a small problem anymore. It is a dynamic problem now. Instead of going from maybe 1 million people a year across the country to 10 million people that have come into this country illegally, and it just exploded. It wasn't even 1 million people a year. I believe that prior to Biden administration just throwing open the borders and saying, come on in, before that, we had illegal immigration, but it was manageable to a degree where it wasn't bankrupting states. It wasn't creating a homeless problem. It wasn't creating a healthcare problem. It wasn't creating a financial crisis with all sorts of cities and states that couldn't house or feed or account for or track or provide for any kind of benefits that would make sense for the community, let alone the illegal immigrants themselves, are now put in a position where there is nowhere to live, there's no jobs, there's nothing they can do, and so they resort to crime because some of them might not go into crime if it wasn't for desperation. So we have created this just absolutely untenable position. Trump ran on mass deportations. Trump ran on close the borders, which he did day one. And the public overwhelmingly believes in that, and I believe they still do. The only way that the Democrats could destroy Trump was by taking the ugly side of immigration, what happens with immigration, the harder optic, and exploiting that and accusing Trump of somehow being different than the presidents before him. Centers are the same that Obama used. They are the same that Bill Clinton used. They are the same that Ronald Reagan and George Bush. Some of them are newer or whatever. But the point is detention centers have been around for a very long time to assist with deportations. It's not about Trump and ICE under his control. It's that we have a different level problem now that has to be addressed.
I would completely agree with that. I can tell you that we used to have, when I did a lot of work with the Border Patrol, you'd look at maybe some statistics involving 800 apprehensions a month down along the southern border in certain areas such as Del Rio or El Paso sector. And to have 20,000 to 15,000 a day was just horrifying to take a look at those statistics. And, the general blending in or the blurring of the lines by the deep Democratic Party is certainly going to put perspectives into. They all think it's this tug at the heartstrings type humanitarian crisis, and it was a crisis created by the Biden administration, and the information was not given out correctly as to how many different nationalities we're dealing with. We dealt with about 158 different nationalities, and a good 75% of those were coming in from countries that were either supported by terrorists or they were terrorist countries, and or from countries where you simply don't have the structure in a government setting to even identify who they are and what they've done. So, Trump has every right to protect his country and he's gotten a lot of backlash for that. But let me make a little bit of a switch here because we're running out of time on our podcast, and that is the legal judgment and the decision making. How will you decide when to settle a case versus taking something to trial?
Well, I've been doing that for 30 years in litigation. So it's something that I do understand. Every case that you evaluate has to be based on, the pros and cons, the risks that you run going to trial. As a former judge, I can tell you I tried 100 jury trials my first year on the bench, and I spoke to every single jury after they reached a verdict. And it's amazing what you find out when you do that, because what you thought might have been important in your case, the jury completely ignored and focused on something else. So every time you go to trial, there is a risk. And you have to assess that risk. You have to assess the evidence. And you also have to assess the position of the defendant as well as the plaintiff. Are they really prepared to go fight this? Because that's what they have to do. And when you have a plaintiff or a defendant, they're not the ones that have chosen litigation as a career path. You are. So you're used to being in the courtroom. They're not. So you really have to focus on the case at hand, evaluate both parties, the individuals that will be sitting in the courtroom, and the financial implications and the precedent set by that case. All of those things have to be factored in. And then you make a judgment call and you advise your client. But ultimately, the client gets to decide whether or not they do it. That's why on commissioner's court agendas and executive session, you'll see recommendation from the county attorney's office to settle a case. They don't have to follow it. They can say, no, this is one we want to take. But you have to be prepared to advise them, the client, on how you think that case should be resolved.
Well, and that brings up a valid point about operations, management, the kind of reform. You're certainly well experienced, but one of the things that I have a question on is what reforms do you implement then in the hiring and training and case management process in your view?
So I believe that one of my best experiences at the county attorney's office was having the liaison relationship with the Harris County Tax Office and Paul Betancourt, because it gave me insight into how he liked to handle things, what the issues were he was facing every day. So every decision I made could be made in context instead of coming in cold and just looking at something with no context. So one of the things that I would like to implement as county attorney is to have people that are, attorneys that work at the county attorney's office in the public law division to work as liaison with those offices so that they get a really good understanding of each office that they represent, what the issues are that they are facing. And then that liaison would work with the trial division if there was something that went to trial. That individual would work with the legislature if there were laws that needed to be changed. So the liaison role would help our office as the county attorney get a better understanding of the unique issues facing each county department so that we could better assist them. That's something that I think is lacking right now. They have their area of expertise, but it's not to a client, it's to an area of law only. And I think the public law division should be expanded so that we can be more proactive in addressing the issues within the county departments and preventing scandals and mistakes from happening in the beginning and nip it in the bud instead of just dealing with them on the back end after they've made the front page of the Chronicle.
Well, and I certainly have about 5 minutes left. Are there any last thoughts or things that you may have left out that you want to discuss? Maybe give us an idea of where people can find you as a candidate, information about what you're running on, what's your stance, any last thoughts?
Well, I'm Jacqueline Lucci Smith, and I am the Republican nominee for Harris County Attorney. And I am asking for the support of the public and the people of Harris County to give me the opportunity to serve all of Harris County. My website is Smith for the number 4 harriscounty.com. You can find out more about me and my background, my 3 decades of experience in law, a lot of it with Harris County. So I understand how the government works, the county government works. I would also let everyone know that, when I was a judge, one of the things that happened that was unique to me was as a county civil court at law judge, we had a lot of bench trials where cases were decided not with a jury because they're quicker and they're less expensive. And so we would set things for bench trial. Probably after about 6 or 8 months on the bench, I inherited a court that had a huge backlog. I had attorneys with cases that typically wouldn't be tried to the bench, that they would want to go to the jury, that would waive jury and try them to me because they knew that I would call balls and strikes, because I was fast and efficient in assessing the case, writing the opinion, entering the judgment, and letting them move down the road. And I was very fair-minded. So it wasn't like all the plaintiffs wanted to waive it and the defendants didn't, or vice versa. Both sides happened to agree to waive jury. I was so even-handed and balanced in the way I administered the law and justice that I had to increase the number of days I gave for bench trials because people wanted me to try the case instead of taking the risk with the jury. That's something that is really, really important in a county attorney's mental approach to things and intellectual approach to things, is having that very even, fair-minded, straight interpretation of the law approach that I bring, that I don't think many people do. I'm the middle child of 5 children. I have been navigating those waters for a long time, seeing both sides of issues and playing mediator and negotiator.
You're the family
and
mediator.
bridges.
That's what you are.
Yeah.
My husband is the middle of 2 an older brother and a younger brother, and he's the mediator in the family as well. Well, Jacqueline Lucci Smith, I cannot thank you enough for your time today. You've given us incredible information about what is required, how important it is to vote and get out and vote for candidates at the local level. You certainly have a lot of experience, and I just want to thank you again for being on our podcast.
Well, you're very welcome. Can I add one thing?
Sure.
Okay, so it has come to my attention that there are a lot of people that are very frustrated with what's happening at the federal level of government and even some at the state level of government. And their solution is to not show up for the midterms to send a message that we don't like the way things are going. And I understand that people are frustrated and they feel like they don't have the ability to make change. Their best ability to change the direction of where Harris County is going right now is my office: election integrity, neighborhood safety, law enforcement. Those are all things that the county attorney's office has a direct and immediate impact on. And if we don't show up and we just hand the county back to people that have political agendas and not the interests of our neighborhoods and our neighbors at heart, then we have a problem. And I think it's really important for people to look at qualifications, look at track records, and if somebody tells you who they are, believe it. And my opponent has told people who she is, and she has no intention of running this office as a law firm. It's going to be a political lightning rod, and she's all about rhetoric, not results, and I'm about results, not rhetoric. So it's really important that people show up and vote. Don't stay home because you're mad. Make your voice heard especially on the races that are going to have a direct impact on you every single day for the next 2 to 4 years.
Exactly. Well, stay tuned for the next episode of Frontline Facts. I am your host, Louisa Deason. Until next time.